Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and my name is Stephanie Bree, and I have been dreading is the correct word, doing this video, but it must be done. This is my Metroid retrospective. Now, for starters, I grew up on Nintendo, so despite my occasional harsh criticisms of Nintendo throughout the years, I still love their games. I'll die on that hill. I'll say that all day long. I love Nintendo games. I don't love everything that they do as a company, and I sure as hell don't love every hardware product that they have released on the planet. Virtual Boy comes to mind. The Wii comes to mind. But it is what Labo. My God, I have heartburn just thinking of the word Labo. But I love their games. And one of their more popular video game franchises, but also lesser popular than some of their other ones, is Metroid. Metroid has been so influential on gaming that it created its own subgenre of games, the Metroidvania, which is very confusingly used because the Vania part comes from Castlevania. But a lot of these Metroidvanias are not Castlevania-type games, nor are they Metroid-type games. So, it is what it is. But, Metroid is a prolific title. It's important to history of gaming and gaming culture and gamers as a whole. So, let's talk about my personal experiences with it. This may or may not surprise you. I had an NES as a kid, and I loved it. And I rented games for it all the time because I couldn't afford to buy them, and my parents couldn't afford to buy them for me. I never once played Metroid as a kid on the NES, or the Super NES, or the Game Boy, or the game that didn't exist on the N64 because they never made one on the N64, although they could have because they had Jet Force Gemini, which could have very easily been reskinned into a Metroid game, but they didn't because Rare did their own thing, and it is what it is, and we're stuck with it. Get over it. I'm over it. It's time to move on and get on with our lives. But I did read about Metroid in the magazines, because I read the magazines. Not Nintendo Power, mind you. I read Sega Visions, Game Pro, Game Informer, PC Gamer, Electronic Gaming Monthly, Electronic Gaming Monthly 2, because yes, there was an actual 2. There was a weekly magazine and a monthly magazine, and a few others. And eventually, occasionally, from time to time, I would pick up a Nintendo Power, but it was not my go-to. Partially and very mostly because it was pure propaganda, and even I as a kid knew that. But also because EGM was thicker and covered everything, and I was like into everything, not just... I loved Nintendo, but I didn't just love Nintendo. I also liked PlayStation and Sega and 3DO and Neo Geo and everything else. I wasn't going to get any of that in a Nintendo Power. But I digress. My first time seeing somebody actually play a Metroid game was in 1995. I went over to a friend's house, and he had a Super Nintendo. I had a Genesis at the time, and an NES, and an Atari. And he was playing Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, I had already played, because I owned a copy of Mega Turrican on the Sega Genesis. And so at that time, I was like, this is just a Mega Turrican knockoff. I'd rather play the good game, not the Nintendo clone. Oops. But years later, I got a GameCube. And there were not a lot of games on the GameCube, I'm sorry to say, unfortunately. This is a fact. There were some good ones. There were some what the fucks. But there was a lot of empty boxes that didn't exist because they weren't made for the GameCube. And so there was not a lot of available software to choose from, so I picked up Metroid Prime because why not? This was the very first time I held a video game controller in my hands and played an actual Metroid game. And I was in my 20s at the time, 21, 22, 23-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. Long past my childhood. Up to that point, I had very obscure, occasional passing references to it in magazines from time to time. People talking about various Metroid stuff on the discussion forums I was a part of at the time. And that aforementioned one incident watching my friend play the game, and at the time thinking that it wasn't as good as Mega Turrican. Because, again, oops. But, because the GameCube, as much as I love it, and I'll defend it to this day, one of the greatest consoles I've ever owned, and some of my best memories as a human were playing GameCube games. I'll say that until the day I die. There weren't a lot of games to play. So I bought a Game Boy player, and a Game Boy Advance, and a Game Boy Advance link cable, and an e-reader to get the most out of my GameCube, because I was all in. I refused to buy anything with the word Xbox on the brand, and I was still pretty much upset that Sony killed Sega, and I was avoiding them killing Nintendo by going all in on Nintendo and not supporting Sony because I was stupid and believed a lie that was perpetuated online because, it happens. Oh, well, shit happens. It is what it is. But, in all of this, I ended up picking up a copy of Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance, which sparked my interest in going back and revisiting the classic Metroids I missed out on. So I very decidedly made the mistake of picking up NES Classic Metroid on the Game Boy Advance. Fucking useless game. And then I picked up a physical copy of Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo because I still had a Super NES at the time. And I played the original Super Metroid on original hardware. On a 64-inch plasma screen, high-definition TV, mind you. Not the best screen to be playing that game on, I'll be honest. But it's what I had at the time. It is what it is. But I found out a few things. Over the years, I've played other Metroid games. Metroid Hunters, or Prime Hunters, Prime 2, Prime 3, Metroid Zero Hour, or whatever it's called, Zero Mission, or whatever it's called. Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. And I went back and retried the original NES, and I'm not going to call it a classic. Over the years, I've come to a conclusion. Conclusion number 1. I can live without Metroid. I'm not dying to play another one. Super Metroid was, by far, the best game in the entire franchise. Metroid Prime is literally the only other playable game in the entire franchise. Echoes and Prime 3, garbage. Prime Hunters, fuck off. Zero Mission, yawn. The original, give me a fucking break. The Game Boy game, the Game Boy game, no. Fusion was okay. It was playable, but it was just like, hey, it's really just trying to be Super Metroid, and I already have Super Metroid. I am not fully... Oh, and I've never played other M, and I probably never will. Just so you know. I never said I played every Metroid game. I just said I played many of them. Most of them. I'm not entirely enamored by the mythos or the story or the setting of Metroid. I like Super Metroid because it's a sci-fi action-adventure survival game. All the other games are, I don't know what they are. Metroid Prime was a first-person shooter, and you can call it a first-person adventure if you like to, if you like the taste of Miyamoto's cum. I don't. But you don't get to change the definition of words just because you don't like a word. And I'm saying this as somebody that is very, very particular about how the word retro gets used. But it is what it is. I studied linguistics in college, so even I recognize that words do evolve over time. I'll allow it. I don't have to like every occurrence of it, but as a trans woman, I can't be too opposed to this phenomenon because, you know, it is what it is. Which does take me back to the whole reveal. Everybody thought that Seamus, and I'm going to call her Seamus, not Samus, because it just don't. Seamus was a guy in a robot suit, unless you beat the game quick enough, which again is stupid. And then you get to see her in a bikini, which again is why. Just so you could prove that she's a girl. Anyways, I'm not a fan of the whole Metroid thing, and there's nothing you can do to convince me that it's a good series, because it ain't. Maybe you enjoy it, and you can, and I'm okay with that. I'm not going to shit on your parade, you know. But I do not enjoy the Metroid games. I will replay Super Metroid once a decade, and I'll have a good time doing so. I may or may not ever go back to Metroid Prime if the stars align and the gods allow me to ever acquire another GameCube or GameCube-compatible hardware, i.e. Wii, ever again, and pick up a copy. There's a chance, however slim as it may be, that I try that game again. Otherwise, I'm essentially done and over Metroid. I'm over it. I don't need Metroid in my life, and I'm okay with it.